Okay, now that the concrete was cured about 2 or 3 days later, I could start framing up my walls. So I came in with my pressure treated sill plates here, measured them out, measured out the top plates at the same time to be my 10-foot walls. So I had, like I said, the 10-foot side walls and then the 10-foot front and back walls with a total of 10 foot 7 inches from the front to the back, with the 3.5 inch overlap of each 2x4 wall at the front and the back of the side walls. So here I'm pulling up the forms, and to be noted, I sprayed in WD-40 on the inside of the form so that way I wouldn't have a pain in the butt time trying to get the forms off of the concrete once it was cured. Okay, once I had the forms off, I was marking the holes to be drilled for the sill plates, for the J-bolts. The best thing to use here was a spade bit on a driver, and that was a quick way to make holes in the sill plates and get them all lined up. So I test fit all the holes for the sill plates first prior to making the walls, so that way I wouldn't have an issue after I framed up the walls to get them on top of the J-bolts. So what I was doing here was on the bottom of the pressure treated sill plates, in order to create a waterproof barrier between the concrete slab and the sill plate, I used some foam gasket sill plate that I picked up at Home Depot, and that fits perfectly along the bottom of a 2x4. Okay, so starting with one wall at a time, laying out my wall studs at 16 inches on center, and then I use my framing nailer with 3¼ inch framing nails, nailing in the bottom plate first, and then going along doing the top plate, spaced at 16 inches on center. So here I'm starting to put the sheathing on by myself. I figured that if I put the sheathing on while the walls were on the ground, it would be easier instead of putting up the sheathing after I lifted up the walls. So here on this wall, I'm overhanging on both of the sides of the wall with my sheathing to cover up the other widths of the 2x4s on the front and back of that wall. And so here I'm measuring out to make sure that I'm staggering my 4x8 foot sheets of OSB, so that way it gives the framing of the wall a bit more strength instead of lining up the 8-foot sheets on top of each other. And that's just good building practice. And so the way that I was building my walls here was in order so that once I had all the walls built on top of each other on the ground, I could easily just lift one up at a time, and that way the other walls were not getting in my way as I was lifting them up. So as you can see here, I'll probably be shifting this wall around a little bit just so it's out of the way of the other walls when I go to lift them up. So here, starting on the back wall with the pressure treated sill plate with gasket on, 16 inches on center for the walls. And essentially this is just the same on the 3 side walls since there's no windows. Nice and easy. And then I did the wall with the door last. So on this wall, since it's the back wall, I didn't overhang my sheathing at all because my plan was for the side walls to overhang on top of that wall to cover the side of the 2x4. And so this was my last non-complicated wall. 16 inches on center for all the wall studs again, and then sheathing on top of this. For the sheathing I used 7/16 OSB sheathing on all the walls, and then I also did the same thing for the roof. So the lesson learned for this final wall with the door is, for the sill plate, instead of keeping the sill plate a full 10 feet and then cutting the bottom of the sill plate after, I ended up cutting the sill plate first, and this caused the bottom of the door to go out of square while I was moving it, and made it a bit more difficult. So I probably should have just left the sill plate as the full 10 feet, and then once it was in place, just cut the bottom with a handsaw. Okay, on to a new day here, ready to lift up the walls. So in order to help me lift up the walls, I screwed a 2x4 to the sides of the wall. That way when I lifted it up, I had something to lean it against and get it in place. I put down a couple stakes to lift up the wall above the height of the J-bolts, and then kind of moved it and jiggled it around into place until I lined up the holes, and then I removed the 2x4s of the stakes that were underneath the base plate, and then it would slip right down onto the J-bolts. It's a little bit difficult to do by yourself, but I managed to do it. So here you can see what I was doing to get the height of the wall above the J-bolt. Now that's because I didn't want to put too much weight on top of the J-bolt without the concrete fully curing and then cracking out the side. I probably should have put the J-bolts a little bit further inside to the concrete, because I had one or two that did end up cracking and then falling out due to the weight on top of the J-bolt while I was putting the wall on. Like I said, it's hard to do by yourself, so accidents do happen. So here, once I got the second wall up, I used the framing nailer with 3 1/4 inch nails to nail in the second wall to the first wall, and then that way that would stiffen things up a little bit before I lifted up the third wall. And then I did the same thing once I had the third wall up. I nailed it at the back, so the back wall was tied into the side walls before I moved in the wall with the door. This one was a bit of a pain to move by myself, so the sill plate gaskets, as you can see there, were kind of falling off. After all the walls were in place, I actually ended up using a low expanding foam on the base of the sill plate just to ensure that no moisture would come in. So where the sill plate gasket fell off, it wasn't the end of the world anyways. So this was quite the accomplishment, getting all 4 walls in, and then I tied in this wall with the door to the side walls, and then I could start my my framing for the ridge board and then rafters the next day. So here we are the next day. I'm starting with my 2x6 ridge board. I was using a rafter ridgeboard connector, these metal plates that I got from Home Depot, and then at the bottoms of the rafters I used the hurricane ties. So there you can see the ridgeboard connectors at the tops that I was nailing in. So I was marking it all out first, and then I did the same at the top of the double sill plate, or the top of the double top plate, prior to nailing in the rafters.